The bride of the mountain house. Deep in the mountains, where the forest grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground, there stood an old bungalow. It had been abandoned for almost 40 years. The villagers who lived at the base of the mountain never spoke of it after sunset. They said the house was not empty. They said something still lived inside it, waiting. Farhan and Manua had been married only 2 weeks. They were young, deeply in love, and full of the kind of confidence that only new couples have, the belief that nothing in the world could touch them as long as they were together. Farhan was an amateur photographer who loved exploring forgotten places, and when a friend mentioned an old colonial-era bungalow hidden in the hills, hardly touched by tourists, he could not resist. Manua, adventurous and curious by nature, agreed at once. "It will be romantic," she said, laughing. "Just the two of us, an old house, candles, and the mountains. What could go wrong?" They should have asked the driver who dropped them at the base of the trail. He had refused to go any further, no matter how much money Farhan offered. "That road leads only to the bungalow," the old driver said, his voice low. "No one goes there after 4 in the evening. Not even goats graze near it. If you must go, promise me one thing. Do not answer if something calls your name in the night. And do not let her comb her hair after dark." Farhan laughed it off as village superstition. Manua rolled her eyes and thanked the driver politely, and the two of them began the long walk up the pine-covered slope, dragging their bags behind them. By the time they reached the bungalow, the sun was already sinking behind the rid 52. The house was larger than they expected, 2 stories of grey stone, half swallowed by wild vines, with tall broken windows like empty eye sockets. A rusted iron gate creaked open on its own as the wind pushed it, and somewhere deep inside, a shutter banged rhythmically, like a heartbeat. "This place is beautiful," Manua whispered, taking out her phone to capture a photo. "Look at the carvings on the door." Farhan pushed the heavy wooden door open. Dust rose in a cloud, catching the last orange light of evening. Inside, the bungalow was frozen in time, a dining table still set with tarnished silver, a grand staircase with a broken banister, portraits on the walls so faded that the faces had turned to shadow. They chose a large room on the ground floor, close to the front door, and lit candles since there was no electricity. They cooked a simple meal on their portable stove, laughed about the driver's warning, and settled onto their sleeping bags, feeling like the luckiest couple in the world, alone in an ancient house, wrapped only in each other's company. It was nearly midnight when Manua woke up first. She heard humming. A low, sweet melody, like a lullaby, coming from somewhere upstairs. She sat up, her heart quickening, and nudged Farhan awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Farhan listened. The humming stopped the moment he opened his eyes, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. "It's just the wind through the broken windows," he said, though his voice shook slightly. "Old houses make strange sounds." They tried to sleep again, but neither of them truly did. Around 2 in the morning, Manua felt a strange coldness settle over the room, a cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She turned to look at the doorway and saw a shape, tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the top of the doorframe, standing perfectly still in the darkness, watching them. She screamed and grabbed Farhan's arm. When he sat up and turned his flashlight toward the door, there was nothing there. Just an empty, dark hallway and dust drifting in the beam of light. "There's nothing, Manua. You were dreaming." "I wasn't dreaming," she said, tears in her eyes. "It was looking at me. It was smiling." Farhan wanted to leave right then, but the mountain trail was treacherous in darkness, and neither of them had the courage to walk through that thick forest at night. They decided to stay awake until dawn, huddled together with the candle burning low. That was when they heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the upper floor. Step, step, step. Then a pause, as though something was standing directly above them, listening to their breathing. Then the footsteps began again, moving toward the staircase. Farhan blew out the candle, thinking darkness might hide them, but that only made things worse. In the blackness, they both heard breathing that was not their own, deep, slow, and impossibly close, as if someone enormous was leaning directly over Manua's face. Then a voice spoke. It was not loud. It was gentle, almost tender, and that gentleness was more terrifying than any scream could have been. "You are so beautiful," the voice said, close to Manua's ear. "I have waited so long for someone like you to come to my home." Farhan relit the candle with trembling hands. The room was empty, but Manua's hair, which had been tied back, was now loose and spread across her shoulders, as though invisible fingers had gently combed it out while she sat frozen in fear. They ran. They grabbed nothing but the flashlight and burst out of the room into the hallway, intending to escape through the front door. But the front door, which they had left open, was now shut and would not budge, no matter how hard Farhan pulled at it. A low laughter echoed from the top of the staircase, deep, ancient, amused. "Why do you wish to leave so soon?" the voice asked. "The night has only just begun, and your bride has not yet danced for me." Farhan stepped in front of Manua, holding her behind him, though his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. "Whoever you are, whatever you are, let us go. We meant no disrespect. We didn't know this house was occupied." The laughter grew closer, though nothing was visible on the stairs. "This house has been mine for 200 years, little man. I have seen travelers come and go, and I have taken what I wished from many of them. But your wife..." The voice paused, and the temperature in the hallway dropped further still. "Your wife has a light in her that I have not seen in a very long time. I wish to keep her." Manua clutched Farhan's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. "I am newly married. I only just began my life with him. Please let us leave." There was a long silence. Then something moved at the top of the staircase, a shape blacker than the darkness around it, easily 7 feet tall, with eyes that glowed a dull amber, like dying embers. It descended one step at a time, and with each step, the wooden stairs groaned as though bearing a tremendous weight. Farhan remembered, suddenly, an old story his grandmother used to tell him, that jinns who dwell in abandoned places can be reasoned with only through faith, never through fear, and that reciting the words of protection with a calm heart could weaken their hold. His hands shook as he began reciting the Ayatul Kursi under his breath, the only verse he could remember clearly in that moment of terror. Manua, tears streaming down her face, joined him, her voice trembling but growing steadier with each word. The shape on the staircase let out a horrible, echoing shriek, recoiling as though struck. The amber eyes flared brighter, furious now rather than tender. "You dare use such words in my house? This was never your house," Farhan said, surprising even himself with the steadiness that had crept into his voice. "You only claimed it because no one else was strong enough to refuse you. We refuse you." The creature roared, and the entire bungalow shook, dust and plaster raining from the ceiling, windows rattling in their frames. The candle blew out again. In the total darkness, Manua felt something brush past her, cold as ice, and then a violent gust of wind tore through the hallway, throwing both of them to the ground. When Farhan managed to relight the flashlight, the hallway was empty and silent. The front door, which had been sealed shut, now stood wide open, moonlight spilling through it onto the dusty floor. They did not wait a second longer. They ran from that house without their bags, without their belongings, down the dark mountain trail, guided only by the flashlight and the distant lights of the village below. Branches tore at their clothes and their skin, and more than once Manua was certain she heard that same voice calling her name from somewhere behind them in the trees, softer now, almost mournful, as though something ancient and lonely was watching its one chance at companionship disappear into the night. They reached the village just before dawn, collapsing at the door of the old driver's home. He opened the door, took one look at their pale, terrified faces, and did not ask a single question. He simply lit a lamp, gave them water, and let them sit by his fire until the sun rose fully over the mountains. Only then did he speak. The bungalow belonged to a British officer's family, generations ago. It is said the officer's daughter was promised to marry a man from the village, but on the night before her wedding, she vanished from that house and was never found. The elders say a spirit that dwelled in those hills fell in love with her beauty and took her for himself, and has waited in that house ever since for another bride to take her place. He looked at Manua with something like sorrow in his tired eyes. "You are fortunate to have your faith, and fortunate to have run when you did. Not everyone does." Farhan and Manua left the mountains that very morning and never returned. They never spoke of that night to anyone outside their closest family, and even years later, Manua would sometimes wake from a deep sleep, certain she had heard a gentle humming drifting through her window, and a voice, soft and patient, whispering that it was still waiting for her, and that one day, it would come to collect what it believed was rightfully his. To this day, the bungalow still stands on that mountain, its broken windows staring out over the pine forest like empty eyes, and the villagers still warn every traveler who passes through. Do not go there after dark, and if you hear something call your name in that gentle, loving voice, do not answer, and do not look back.